In July of 2018, a jury in St. Louis, Missouri, returned a verdict against Johnson & Johnson. 22 women had brought the case. 6 of them were already dead, and their families were standing in for them. All of them had ovarian cancer, and all of them said the same thing, that they had used the same product in the same way nearly every day for most of their adult lives, because their mothers had used it on them. The jury awarded $4,690 million. It was, at the time, one of the largest product liability verdicts in American history. On appeal, the figure was cut to about $2.1 billion, and the reduced award was upheld. The Supreme Court declined to hear it. The product was baby powder. Not a drug, not a chemical. A tin of soft white mineral dust, sold since 1894, with a scent so specific that most people in the developed world can summon it from memory right now without trying. Johnson & Johnson has said, consistently and throughout, that its talc does not contain asbestos, that it does not cause cancer, and that decades of scientific testing support that position. The company has never accepted liability. It has appealed nearly every verdict against it, and it has won a significant number of these cases outright. And in 2020, it stopped selling talc-based baby powder in the United States and Canada. 3 years later, it stopped worldwide. That was 2018. But the powder in the tin is older than every argument about it, older than the company that sold it, and older than anything that has ever lived. It is a rock. Chapter 1, the softest thing there. There is a scale that geologists use to rank minerals by hardness. Diamond sits at the top, at 10. It scratches everything and nothing scratches it. At the bottom of that scale, at 1, sits talc. It is the softest mineral on Earth. You can scratch it with a fingernail. You can crush it between 2 fingers into powder, which is more or less how it is processed. Chemically, it is a hydrated magnesium silicate, and it forms deep underground when magnesium-rich rocks are cooked by heat and pressure and infiltrated by water over enormous stretches of time. It comes out in soft gray-green blocks called soapstone, which is exactly what it feels like. Soap. Talc has 3 properties that made it industrially irresistible. It is slippery because its structure is built in flat sheets that slide over one another. It absorbs moisture and oil. And it is chemically inert. It does not react with much of anything, which is why it is not only in cosmetics. It is a filler in paper and in paint. It is used to keep tires from sticking in their molds. It is in ceramics, in roofing, in plastics. It is a common excipient in pharmaceutical tablets, which means you have almost certainly swallowed it. It is used as an anti-caking agent in some foods, and it is one of the things that keeps chewing gum from sticking to its wrapper. Talc is one of the most quietly ubiquitous substances in industrial life, and until the 1970s, essentially nobody outside a laboratory had a reason to think about where it came from. That will matter later, because the question at the center of this entire story is not what talc does. Talc is inert. The question is what talc grows next to. Chapter 2. The Accident. Johnson & Johnson did not set out to make baby powder. They set out to make surgical dressings. The company was founded in New Brunswick, New Jersey in 1886 on an idea that was genuinely important. Joseph Lister had shown that infection came from contamination, and the Johnson brothers built a business on sterile, individually wrapped, ready-to-use surgical dressings, which had not previously existed and which saved a great many lives. Alongside that, they sold medicated plasters. And in the early 1890s, letters started arriving from customers saying the plasters irritated the skin. The company's scientific director was a pharmacist named Frederick Kilmer, and his solution was practical rather than visionary. He sent complaining customers a small container of Italian talc with instructions to dust the skin before applying the plaster. Then the letters changed. Customers wrote back asking for more of the powder. not for the plaster, for the powder, and specifically, mothers wrote in saying they were using it on their babies. Johnson's baby powder went on sale in 1894 as a product the company had not planned in response to a use the customers had invented. That is worth marking because it is genuinely unusual in this series. This did not begin with a manufactured anxiety. It began with a real minor problem, friction, damp, nappy rash, and a substance that actually solved it. Talc is very good at what it was being asked to do. Everything that went wrong here happened later, and it happened for a completely different reason. Chapter 3. The smell of a clean child. What happened next was the marketing, and the marketing was extraordinarily good. Through the first half of the 20th century, infant mortality in the industrialized world fell steeply, and public health messaging about hygiene was everywhere. Wash your hands, boil the bottles, keep the child clean. It was correct advice, and it saved enormous numbers of children. Baby powder attached itself to that message and never let go. It was not sold as a convenience. It was sold as part of the ritual of being a competent, modern, hygienic mother, alongside things that genuinely were saving lives. And then there was the smell. The scent of Johnson's baby powder was formulated deliberately and kept consistent for the better part of a century, which means several generations of people in dozens of countries encoded the same smell at the same stage of life. It is one of the most efficiently installed scent memories in commercial history. That is not an accident, and it is not sentiment. It is a designed product attribute. By the 1970s, the company had noticed something in its own sales figures. A large share of the powder was being bought by adult women for themselves. So they turned and sold to them directly with a line that ran for years, "Best for baby, best for you." Advertisements showed grown women using it on their own bodies, daily, framed as the same gentle, wholesome thing they had known as children. That campaign is why the plaintiffs in the Missouri case had all used it every day for 30 and 40 years. They were not misusing the product. They were doing exactly what the advertising had told them to do, in exactly the way it had shown them. Chapter 4. The neighbor in the rock. Here is the geology, and it is the whole case. Talc forms in metamorphic rock when magnesium-rich stone is subjected to heat, pressure, and hot water over geological time. Asbestos forms in metamorphic rock when magnesium-rich stone is subjected to heat, pressure, and hot water over geological time. They are not the same mineral, but they are made by the same process, out of the same parent rock under the same conditions, which means that in a great many places in the world they form in the same deposit, tangled together, talc and soft masses and fibrous minerals like tremolite and anthophyllite running through it. Asbestos is not dangerous because of what it is chemically. It is dangerous because of its shape. It splits lengthwise into fibers thin enough to be inhaled deep into the lung and too durable for the body to clear. They stay. They cause scarring, lung cancer, and mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lung and abdomen, and which is caused by essentially nothing else. Mesothelioma can take 30 to 40 years to appear after the exposure that caused it, and no regulator anywhere has established a safe threshold below which asbestos exposure carries no risk. So the question for a talc mine is not whether the talc is safe. The talc is inert. The question is whether the seam being mined runs anywhere near the other mineral, and whether the process of getting the talc out and grinding it into powder is bringing any of it along. There is a second and separate strand to the litigation that does not involve asbestos at all. The claim that talc particles applied to the genital area can migrate through the reproductive tract and cause chronic inflammation leading to ovarian cancer. The epidemiology on that is genuinely mixed. Some large studies find a modest association, others find none, and researchers disagree about how to interpret them. In 2010, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified the perineal use of talc-based body powder as possibly carcinogenic to humans. In 2024, after reviewing the accumulated evidence, the same agency reclassified talc itself as probably carcinogenic. Johnson & Johnson disputes those conclusions and maintains its product is safe. Chapter 5. The Documents. In December of 2018, Reuters published an investigation based on internal company documents, deposition testimony, and trial exhibits that had been unsealed in the course of the litigation. What the documents showed, according to that reporting, was that from at least the early 1970s, the company was aware that some of the talc it was testing had returned positive results for small amounts of asbestos, and that this information was not disclosed to regulators or to the public. The reporting also described internal discussion in the mid-1970s about the limits of the testing methods being used and about how the industry's own voluntary testing standards were set. Johnson & Johnson responded that the Reuters article was one-sided, inaccurate, and based on a distorted selection of documents, that thousands of independent tests over decades had found no asbestos in its talc, and that its product had always been safe. Both of those things are on the public record, and you can read them both. What is not disputed is what happened in October 2019. The United States Food and Drug Administration tested a bottle of Johnson's baby powder purchased from an online retailer and reported finding chrysotile asbestos in it. Johnson & Johnson recalled the lot, 33,000 bottles, while stating that it stood by the safety of its product and questioning the integrity of the sample and the test. That is the single clearest moment in the whole story, and it is worth being precise about what it does and does not prove. It does not prove that every bottle ever sold contained asbestos. It proves that a regulator, testing a bottle bought off a shelf, found some. Chapter 6. The Maneuver. By the early 2020s, there were tens of thousands of claims pending. What the company did next is the part that lawyers still argue about, and it has a nickname, the Texas two-step. The maneuver works like this. A company facing mass liability restructures itself using a provision of Texas corporate law into two entities. One of them receives the ongoing business and the assets. The other receives the liabilities, in this case the talc claims. The second entity then files for bankruptcy. Bankruptcy freezes all litigation against the filing entity. So the effect is that tens of thousands of individual lawsuits, most of them heading for jury trials, are halted at once and pushed into a single bankruptcy proceeding, where a settlement figure can be negotiated collectively. Johnson & Johnson did this in 2021, creating a subsidiary called LTL Management, which held the talc liabilities and filed for Chapter 11 while the parent company remained profitable and unaffected. The company's argument was that this was the fairest and most efficient route, that it would resolve all claims at once, including future ones, and get money to claimants faster than decades of individual trials. The plaintiff's argument was that a company with a market capitalization in the hundreds of billions of dollars was using a bankruptcy system designed for the insolvent to escape the jury trials it was losing. In 2023, a federal appeals court dismissed the filing on the grounds that the entity was not in financial distress and therefore did not belong in bankruptcy. A second attempt was dismissed later the same year. The company has continued to pursue variations of the strategy, and courts have continued to reject them. Chapter 7. The Quiet Substitution. In May of 2020, Johnson & Johnson announced it would stop selling talc-based baby powder in the United States and Canada. The reason given was declining demand, driven by what the company called misinformation about the product's safety. In 2023, it discontinued talc-based baby powder worldwide. Both products were replaced with the same thing, cornstarch. And here is the detail that lands hardest once you know it. Cornstarch baby powder was not invented for the recall. It was not a new technology or a compromise or a substitute that had to be developed. Johnson & Johnson had been selling a cornstarch version alongside the talc one for decades. It was on the same shelf. It cost about the same. It does the same job. The alternative was always there. It simply was not the one with 120 years of brand equity attached to it, and it was not the one the entire supply chain, and the mines and the marketing were built around. The company continues to maintain that its talc product was safe, that the science supports it, and that the decision was commercial rather than an admission of anything. That position is legally and factually its right to hold, and a number of juries have agreed with it. What is beyond argument is the timeline. A product went on sale in 1894. Questions about its raw material were being asked internally, according to unsealed documents, by the early 1970s. It was withdrawn from its two largest markets in 2020 and from the world in 2023. That is roughly 50 years between the first documented internal concern and the last tin leaving the shelf. And for every one of those 50 years, it was sitting next to a product that did the same job and was made of corn. There is a smell that a very large number of people can produce from memory without trying. It is not a flower, and it is not food. It was designed in a laboratory and held unchanged for a century and applied to almost everyone in this part of the world before they were old enough to have an opinion about it. That is what makes this one different from everything else in this series. Nobody had to sell it to you. It was applied to you. And the tin sat there, on the shelf above the sink, next to the powder made of corn, for 50 years. Not everything on that shelf came from a mine, though. A few feet away, there is something that was cut from an animal, laced up the back, and prescribed, by doctors, in writing, as a medical necessity for the health of the women wearing it, until they started performing autopsies. Did you grow up with this smell in your house? Tell me in the comments what surprised you most.